Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. It's March the 29th. We're closing in on the end of the third month. We're closing in on the end of the book of Joshua too. Joshua 24 is what we're going to look at today. And so Joshua is getting close to the end of his life. And he brings everybody together. And the way it's described in many headers in Bibles, so some Bibles will have headers, over sections, is that it is a renewing, the Lord's covenant is renewed with the people. This is what's going to happen. And I guess the question I want to kick out with is here, well, let me read a couple of verses and then we'll start. It says, Then Joshua summoned all the tribes of Israel to Shechem, including their elders, leaders, judges, and officers. So they came and presented themselves to God. Joshua said to the people, This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham, and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River, and they worshipped other gods. But I took your ancestor Abraham from the land of the Euphrates and led him into the land of Canaan. I gave him many descendants through his son Isaac. To Isaac I gave Jacob, and Esau. To Esau I gave the mountains of Seir, while Jacob and his children went down into Egypt. And then he recants the whole story. This is, I don't know, if it's certainly a covenant renewal, whether it's a vow renewal or not, I don't know. But are there any benefits in a regular renewal of commitments? And outside of marriage is the easy one.
Yeah, that's the easy one.
Outside of marriage, do we do that anywhere else?
I think it's good to do, even in our commitment relationship with the Lord. On a personal level, I think it should be done often. Not that we need to remind Him, but we need to remind ourselves the commitment we've made to give ourselves completely and wholly to Him.
Cheryl?
I'm pretty sure Joshua actually states it in this book at least once about you needing to remember not only God's provisions but His Word, and that it's something that you need to daily keep reminding yourself of and make it part of who you are.
Yeah,
with your life.
Some of the festivals that get implemented, Passover, for example, or the purpose of them is renewal, reminder. Hey, don't forget where you came from. Don't forget what you're doing. So he's renewing this covenant at the end of his life. He's going to die. The older I get, the less I care about. But the things I care about, the more I care about. Does that make sense? What are some of the things at the end of life that are more important? We're not, I hope, at the end of our lives here. Even though based on previous podcasts that might be questionable.
You never know.
But what are some things? I was specifically referring to him flipping over the heel and his value just decreasing.
Somebody called me last night and we were having a conversation and they reminded me about my value was less than 50 shekels. So I said, thank you.
So what are some of the things at the end of life you find more important, or at your place in life now? Maybe we don't consider ourselves at the end, that are more important now than they might have been when you were younger.
I would certainly say family is probably at the top of that list, where you realize the relationships you have are far more important than perhaps you recognized early on in life. Whether that be a spouse, children, grandchildren, close friends, and that list can grow outward. But I think those always come to the forefront of the value of those relationships. I know I have a greater appreciation for all of those within my inner circle, more than I ever have before.
Sure.
And I think expounding upon the people in your life, especially your kids and your family, what are they going to carry on? What have you taught them? What are they going to teach to their children and their grandchildren? I mean, I know for me, ultimately, that's how I came to Christ, because of the lineage of Christians in my family. And I think a lot about that with my own kids.
Yeah, I think family in general, that probably usually rises to the top for everybody. The spiritual values I want them to know, but also the things I want them to remember about me. You know, last night, for example, yesterday had been a long day. I'd been at the church, you know, recording podcasts, having meetings. I left, went home, had to take one of the grandkids to karate. Then I had to go to Elizabeth City, and when I got back, you know, then it was almost 7 o'clock, and I had one there that needed to get his homework done, and he wants to tap on the table and, you know, jump on the table, and, you know, between problems or questions, you know, it's a 5-minute process to get him to refocus on the next one. And I sat there at the table patiently, you know, trying to make sure we got it all done so that he could go to school tomorrow with, or what would have been today. There have been times in my life where that would have been very difficult for me to do. I would have said I'm tired, and I did have other work to do, and I went and got it done after I was finished. But it's important for me, one, to know that I will have patience with him. People will have patience with him. He can do it. You know, those things are important to me. And I have found myself when I was younger being so busy, and it's not that I'm not now, but I'm being so busy that I wouldn't stop doing what I was doing for my kids or my grandkids. And that value has gone way up now. You know, I see the importance of it.
I never want people to feel like you think your agenda is always more important.
Right, that's right.
Than the time that they need from you.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes all the way back. He starts at Abraham's dad, you know, and grandfather. He talks about them, and then he starts the process. In history class in school, they'll talk about people who we'll never meet, you know, so that they know a little bit about them, because knowing about who went before us tells us a little bit about how we ended up here. How important is it for us to talk to our family or the people around us or the people we're in covenant with about how we got here? You know, this is what happened to lead us to this point. Spiritual things, practical things, I don't know.
Telling our stories are extremely important. As you said, it not only helps other people understand where we were, where we've come from, but it also helps them understand why and how we view things currently. And then to be able to pass that history along, then they can have a better appreciation for who we are, who they are, and why we've made some of the choices and decisions along the way that we have, whether they be spiritual or practical decisions.
Yeah, I agree. I think it helps us learn to appreciate how we got where we are, and that there were sacrifices made in the past, sometimes from people that you didn't even have a chance to meet. I mean, here he states, you know, I gave you the towns where you're living, I gave you vineyards and olive groves for food that you did not plant. And I think that that's true in all of our lives. A lot of the blessings that we have are a result of things that have been given to us through people in our lives before, sacrifices, like I said, that they've made, or choices they've made.
Yeah. You know, I think that you talk about your spiritual heritage, you know, the people before you and I think those things are important. I think it helps for them to understand how we ended up in a certain area, you know, region of the country. How did your family end up here? Those things matter. You know, what brought you from wherever. Go ahead.
I'm living on a piece of land that my great granddaddy bought.
Oh wow.
That I never met.
Yeah, and I think we don't appreciate those things, and sometimes it's good to rehash, to do those things. Well, he goes on and he gets toward the end, and he says in verse 19, "Then Joshua warned the people, 'You're not able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy and jealous God.'" We haven't been too long talking about how God's commandments were attainable. Here he says you're not able to do it. Is he talking about their own personal makeup? Is he talking about the difficulty in following after God? What do you think his intentions here when he says you're not able to serve the Lord?
I think it's referring to idolatry. When, he says you can't serve any other God but me, and that he is a jealous God. And so if you choose idols over me, then you're no good to me anymore. You're going to choose one or the other.
And I think he's reminding them of God's standard is so much higher than ours that in and of our own strength and desires, we can't today. We can't meet God's standard, but it doesn't alleviate our responsibility to walk in obedience to what we already know and have. And so we're dependent on him. And I find it interesting that he gave them the warning right on the heels of that. He said, I won't forgive your rebellion or your sin. He said, there's a price to be paid if you choose not to do it.
Yeah, I was wondering if he was treating them like children.
Mm.
You know how you get a little child who they can sing a song or they can do a flip or whatever, and then you want them to do it for somebody else. You've seen them do it around the house, and they won't do it. And you'll say to them, you can't do it. You can't do a flip. You can't sing a song. You can't do whatever. Because their response then, when he says that, is yes, we can.
Yep.
I mean, they clearly had to know their weaknesses and how many times they had.
Yeah, it's almost like he's provoking them in the sense to get a response out of
That's
them.
right.
Maybe it's his disgust coming out. I've watched you. No, you can't.
Well, they were sure they could, though. They believed they could. But they couldn't. And they do this twice. They said, yes, we are witnesses to what we have said. We can do it. Do you believe they meant it when they said it? Or if they had any self-awareness about why he was telling them they couldn't?
I'm sure they believed it when they said it.
I think it's an emotional response. More than it is an accurate or legitimate response. And I base that partly because after they have emphatically said, we'll do it, we can, he says, all right, then destroy the idols among you and turn your hearts to the Lord. Which indicates that, as you mentioned, they were struggling with idols and their hearts were not fully turned to the Lord. They were not walking in complete obedience. And he said, okay, if you're adamant about it, you're saying it, now demonstrate it. Step up to the plate.
We're going to obey. We promise to. Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
So it says, so Joshua made a covenant, or renewed the covenant, ever how you want to look at it, with the people that day at Shechem, committing them to follow the decrees and regulations of the Lord. Joshua recorded these things in the book of God's instructions. So I just want to stop right there. We'll see a couple of things like this occasionally. What do you think the book of God's instructions are?
Who knows? But in my mind, what I'm seeing here is all the law, civil, moral commandments, all that God had given to Moses, have been passed on. Mm-hmm. There they are. And what I see happening is Joshua goes in there and he makes a notation, date, location, time.
Repented here.
That's exactly right. We, ratified or recommitted, on this date here based on what had already been given to them. That's kind of what I see in my mind.
I agree with what he's saying, because I feel like there were the commandments and then all the things that followed after that. And I wonder, was it all written down somewhere? You'd have to assume that it probably was continually written down, because so many people couldn't read then, and
or you think
it was all going to
think they couldn't.
Yeah, it was all going to get passed down verbally.
Yeah,
from the priest or whoever the leaders were.
You'll find some the up and down of the kings later, and in one of the king's stories, what happens is he gets the priest to go get the book of God's instructions, and come back out and read it.
Start reading.
Yeah, just let's share it with the people and see what happens. So it closes and this is truly a little weird for me. And so we're going to just talk about it for the fun of it. It said, Joshua said, well, he says, Joshua recorded these things in the book of God's instructions. As a reminder of their agreement, he took a huge stone and rolled it beneath the terebinth tree beside the tabernacle of the Lord. Joshua said to all the people, this stone has heard everything the Lord said to us. It will be a witness to testify against you if you go back on your word to God. How was the rock a witness? How did it hear? What does he mean by that?
Maybe it's another way to hold accountability. He's like, look, this thing's going to be here a long time after you are, in generations to come.
Yeah, I think he's saying to them, you've said these things, obviously in my presence, other people have heard you. This rock has heard you, not in the literal sense that rock can hear, but it is going to be a literal witness against you in the future. A reminder that we had this day, we had this discussion, we ratified this covenant, and every time you see this, it should be a reminder to you of the promises that you've made, and your promise to God should be as permanent as this stone is.
Yeah, so at this point, the tabernacle is not moving. Mm-hmm. It's in a permanent location. Every time they walk by, it's a reminder. Mm-hmm. I don't know if y'all have those things in your life or not, that every time you see them, it reminds you of something. Mm-hmm. It doesn't speak.
Mm-hmm.
There's a road near where my grandparents lived. When I was 16, I guess 17, I was dating this girl, and I had a wreck on that road. I was listening to a specific song. I went over an embankment, come up in her front yard. It messed my car up. It was a tank. But every time I pass that road, it's down near Washington. That's what I think about. It reminds me. The road's not going, hey, do you remember? Right. It's not speaking, but it reminds me because it's always there. The road never leaves. The road's never gone. And I think that's some of what he's saying. We're going to put this rock here, and every time you see this rock, it's going to remind you that you said, yes, we will serve the Lord. Yeah. And if you don't, it speaks against that.
When you think of all the reminders that we have built in our lives, a married couple, for instance, whether it's a ring or a piece of jewelry, as a reminder. Special days are reminders for us. When we travel, we typically get something so that when we see it, I'm thinking about trip Christmas to Israel, mm-hmm. And I have a little ram's horn that sits on one of the shelves of my desk, and and I see that fairly often. And every time I look at it, I immediately think back to that trip and some of the experiences and sights and sounds of that, and that's what the rock, I think, was intended to do for the people.
Sure. Do you have any thoughts about it?
No, I agree. I think it's a visual reminder.
Yeah, conviction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess it's sort of like the altars that they built in different places to commemorate things.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I would say so. Good. All right. Well, Jay, you want to close us in prayer today?
Sure. Lord, we thank you for reminding us that we need to constantly renew our covenant promises with you. You never leave us or forsake us, and you never change, but we often do. And may we often remember the promises that we've made to give ourselves completely to you. May we do that with all that is within us. And may we even establish reminders about our covenant relationship with you so that we don't forget. And may we take time to share our story with our children and those around us under our influence, so that the stories of what you've done in and through our lives will be remembered even long after we're gone. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.